We are super excited to be talking to you about fostering future leaders, strategies for talent development and retention in a rapidly changing world. So basically, the people stuff, all right? And you've got two folks here who are, I think, pretty passionate about the people side of the equation and how we can do all of that better. You know, when you think about the classical construct of people, process, technology, in my professional experience, the people part always kind of lags and is the least attended to. So I'm super excited to be talking about it today. Quick introduction, my name is Melissa Swift. I lead the workforce and organization practice for Capgemini Invent in North America. So I work a ton on all these workforce issues. Basically, how do we get the people part of the equation working better, right? Everything from designing better jobs and ways of working to growing better leaders to creating an employee experience that actually doesn't stink. And this is my book, Work Here Now, Think Like a Human and Build a Powerhouse Workplace. And it came out last year, and we'll be touching on some concepts from the book in our conversation. And importantly, how they play out in real life. And that's why I'm super excited to have Vagesh here. And Vagesh, do you want to introduce yourself and talk about why you're here?
Sure. So this is Vagesh Dave. I'm a CIO for McDermott. McDermott is roughly in about 50 countries, and we build oil and gas infrastructure. We also do alternate energy infrastructure. So if there's something around energy, we build it. We engineer it. And one unique thing about when I read her book was, it's just, the problems and so the solutions, it's just around the people. And I think what last few years COVID taught us, it's all about the people. And so I'm really excited to just kind of share some of the insights. While Melissa will just kind of talk about just how this relates to people in general, talent in general. Is IT any different? And if it is, in what ways? And also kind of give a flavor of what we see across the globe. It's very different by country, by culture, and by geographies.
Fantastic. All right, well, let's start with, okay, so we're going to be talking about people. When we say, tech talent, who's actually in this workforce? If a Martian landed on Earth and said, okay, tech talent, what would you show them? What would you tell them?
So Melissa, I would say tech talent is really evolving. If you look at just, and you can categorize in many ways, but I would say there are two broad categories. You can look at technology folks who are working for this large tech. They don't really have to deal with business users or anything, but they're really focused on advancing the technology, whether it's in AI or cloud. And these are the folks who are working for Google's, Amazon's of the world, building the products. Then you have the second category, broader category, which is in a corporate world, working for enterprises, consulting. And this group has to not just know technology, they're expected to know the business, right? So they're typically business people who also do technology. And if a Martian lands on the Earth, they'll be surprised because this technology folks are not your stereotypical tech people. They are actually very well integrated in business. If you sit in a room, a lot of times it's hard to figure out who's IT, who's not. And to me, I think that's an evolution where you are required to understand the business processes and business challenges, as well as deal with the velocity of technology change.
So let me ask you actually a follow-up question, because this has been a hot topic among some of my clients, are those groups fundamentally different, or have they just had different kinds of corporate educations? I think sometimes there's a myth in the corporate world that there's like all this special talent working for the big tech companies, right? People are smiling, like people have heard this myth, right? Do you think it's fundamentally really two different groups of people, or do you think they've just had different professional educations?
I would say education is one thing. So if you are super technical, I had math and computer science background when I grew up, but I went to corporate. I could have just gone to a tech company and just said, never see anybody and just really deal with tech is around me. And I think it's about what you like. If you like dealing with people and complex problems and ambiguity, you are working in an organization and dealing with that. If you are really super focused on just having certain mindset where you're more problem solver and you're dealing with just technology and you're working for these companies. And there's a choice now. And people do migrate back and forth.
Yeah, so it's different motivations. I like that as a lens, because in my experience, a lot of what kind of goes on with employees that we think of as skills is actually motivation and affinity. So I like your answer there.
Now, question for you. What do you find is the greatest motivator in 2024 for people? and what energizes them?
Yeah, it's a great question because when you actually do surveys on this topic, I don't know if folks have ever seen surveys on this topic, it always says pay, right? So we're gonna take that answer, chuck it in the garbage, right? Like, I don't think it's a valid, people answer that because they're scared of not answering that, right? And then not getting paid, right? So put the pay question aside. What we're really seeing motivating folks today is, I think, day-to-day interesting work. Right? Not my job sounds cool, not I have a great title, not, I'm not gonna bring up, not we have a foosball table, sorry, I said it. But what I'm doing every day has meaning for me and it's interesting. And then a corollary of that is also I get to work with interesting people. I think that's sort of in the same category or related. But that's really what we're seeing across organizations. And then particularly for earlier in career workers, and this is an encouraging development, right? Because I was talking to some folks, during this event, we were talking about how, when we were early in our careers, it was all about like, let me get the next promotion and move up the corporate ladder. And for some of the younger generations in the workforce, they are much more keyed around, let me build my skill set broadly, let me learn more. Am I really in a role where I can kind of expand my horizons, right? So that's some of what I'm seeing and hearing, kind of across populations in general, not specific to tech talent. Now, do you think that translates through into your world?
It does. I think, if you look at technology professionals, by just nature, they are very curious. They're lifelong learners. They have to learn. I mean, this is the only profession probably, or one of the few ones that you have to keep learning because the pace of technology, if you look at just last few years, has really changed. And they always want to be relevant. And as a company, you really want to offer that challenging work environment where they are working with newer things. And I talk to a lot of my employees, younger generation are just not in the US, even outside of US. Sometimes they will say, Vagesh, I'm not really living for more pay. I'm just living because I get to do something interesting. And really challenge for us is how do you really keep it relevant? How do you really make those investments to modernize the organization in this world where, technology debt is real, cost constraints are real. And so what is that hook to keep these younger generations and grow them?
Yeah. So I like that. So technology work has a natural hook, right? That you can't just sit there and not learn, right? You have to kind of keep growing your brain. So I think that's certainly encouraging. Let me talk about the leadership level for a second. I promised Vagesh we'd get into some controversial topics. So talk to me about what are technology leaders great at? And then talk to me about what do they kind of stink at? What do technology leaders tend to be not very good at?
So look, I think one thing, if you look at just how technology leaders showed up during COVID, they were there, they made sure organizations function, they brought technology up front, and they were resilient. So just by nature, technology leaders, they can adapt, they can deal with change, and they can really infuse the resilience in the organization at the same time, be evangelists sometimes is needed. Where I feel, just my personal perspective, is they could be more empathetic. And now in the hybrid work environment or remote work environment, it's just so important to really touch that every employee and make those physical connections because they may not be in the office now all the time. My own organization in Americas, we are in office 1 or 2 days a week. And a lot of employees like, Vagesh, I'm happiest when I'm working remote. And I worry about how do you develop a culture? How do you really reach out to them? And how do you really create those touch points where you know what's going on in their life and they feel supported?
Yeah, so we will come back to these topics, right? Because I think there's a lot here that probably folks in this room are wrestling with, right? About building cultures remotely.
So Melissa, how do you grow great leaders? Do you have any recommendation for this room?
Yeah, how do you get to those empaths,
yeah.
right? Yeah. Well, I think it's a few things. I think number one, when you think about great leaders, I try to reverse engineer out of the great leaders that I've worked with or I've observed. I think there's a few things. I think great leaders, oftentimes their bosses gave them space. I don't know, a book that I would recommend that's not my own book is Sid Finkelstein's Super Bosses. And so Finkelstein actually went in, he's a Dartmouth professor, he went in and studied basically leaders that created other great leaders, right? So, if you're familiar with NFL, or college football coaching trees or chefs, where a lot of the chefs, sous chefs, go start their own restaurants, right? So he actually went and formally studied, right? What does that look like? And so one of the things that he observed about the super bosses is they were actually so confident in their own abilities that they stayed the heck out of their people's airspace, right? That they were like, yeah, I got it. I know how to do this. Do you know how to do this? Right? They were not micromanaging. They didn't need to do it for their people. They really gave them that space to move. And I think about that research a lot because it's interesting because what it takes from you as a leader to then grow other great leaders is you've got to be secure in yourself. And you know what? That's hard, right? Like you're a leader in a modern, complex how many things a day come right at you, right? It can be like being in an asteroid belt. Things are just flying at your head. So having that right?
It agrees with you.
There you go. Exactly. That's the asteroids.
Thunder from the heavens.
But yeah, having that continued confidence and that ability to make space for your people, I think is really, really critical. I also think that part of what breeds great leaders, honestly, is being tested a bit. Like coming back to your point about resilience, I don't know anybody who's a great leader who didn't deal with like some weird stuff, right? It doesn't have to be, the full-on global catastrophe we all dealt with a few years ago. But one hallmark is they've dealt with something where they didn't have all the resources. They didn't have a perfect setup. They didn't have a perfect team. And they worked their way through it. And again, that requires great confidence where you can say, it's kind of like not being a business helicopter parent, right? Like I want to solve 80% of the problems for my people. I want to keep the rain off them. In general, I believe in that umbrella model of leadership. But also but to say I'm going to let 20% of the rain come onto them so they can grow and develop.
So
Yes.
we're having this technical difficulty.
Yes.
May I ask you a question?
Go for it.
So, our IT people, we want them, they have to know technology, which is a lot. It's changing all the time. Just the tech itself is a lot, let alone how that tech is provided by all these different vendors. We talk about this notion of confidence. Hey, I got this. How many IT people really feel I got this when what they need to get is all the IT, all the
And the
business, the outcomes, the change. So I do think it's different for IT.
Well, I'll give you my take on that, and then I would love to hear your
Yeah,
take
sure.
as well. My take on that is some of it is you have to hit that level of comfort with not knowing everything. Like to your point, it's like knowing enough. And not knowing enough at sort of imposter level of like, oh, I can fake it through supply chain. Good luck faking it through supply chain. But understanding that I can know this business at the 70% level, and that enables me to have that dialogue, right? And I don't have to know it at the 100% level. And at the 70% level, I can be confident, right? Like think about the research about women don't apply to jobs if they don't have a really high proportion of the credentials, whereas men will apply with a much lower proportion. Extrapolate that out to all human beings, that finding that right level where I can be confident on, to your point, like not knowing everything that could be known. That's the sweet spot. But I think your point is very well taken. I think it's hard to achieve. I mean, what do you think?
I think you're right, Martha. Look, I think there's something called domain expertise we talk about. So what you say goes even beyond that. So just because I know supply chain now, am I in oil and gas industry? Am I in high tech? Am I in retail? And a lot of that changes. But to me, I think in general, technology workers, they are geared to agile learning. Technology changes every few years, and they want to learn. They want to do something different. You talk to your database administrators, and they say, Vagesh, I don't want to do this. This is now legacy. I like to do online databases. And so I think that helps that population to really be agile in learning. At the same time, technology is a transferable skill. You talk about that. Say, if you do technology here, you can go to a different business, learn the domain expertise, and kind of apply, create value there. And a lot of times that cross-pollination helps.
Yeah.
Right.
Follow-on question, right?
Yep.
I think on the one hand, you have this notion that we want to let all our employees feel like they're empowered to build their own career path. And career mobility is a very important aspect of motivation. experience is the right balance, and is it prompting some level of structured career pathing, a good way to know how much flux you can have, and how do you support and contain that while also having a plan for velocity and results?
I mean, I think this is a seminal question that organizations are wrestling with, right? Because there's this myth of kind of like the fully agile workforce, right? Where you just have your little suitcase of capabilities and you sort of run from task to task. And it's not structured the way life is structured, right? Life, your mortgage comes due monthly, right? And you need a real job and blah, 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 right? And then over here, there's the old-fashioned world that we don't want to be in either, of like, this is it, it's super linear, blah, blah, blah. But this middle distance, there's lots of different places you can land. And I think some of it is actually enabling particularly younger workers to zoom out a bit and to see that there are, illustratively, let's say 3 branching career paths from their role, but also taking the pressure off of the present moment. I think that's where we get a lot of pressure from our employees right now, that a good, employee experience, and that's the downside of those, particularly those younger workers, really wanting to grow themselves laterally. They put a lot of pressure on us, right? How are you going to grow me tomorrow? How are you going to grow me tomorrow? So I'll give you a strategy I actually use with my own team, which is let's talk about your next project, right? And taking the conversation out of like the exact present moment and then talking about, for fans of sci-fi, right, multiple branching futures, right? Talk about those multiple branching futures, but taking the pressure off of like this exact moment, because in this exact moment, sometimes career pathing is really hard to solve for, because to your point, there's the work. The work is the work. So having it be a more future-oriented discussion with, I think your point about archetypes of career paths is very well taken. That seems to be where most, kind of leading-ish practice organizations are landing. We've got the basic structure. We can talk to people about the basic structure of the career paths, but we understand, things are moving fast in real time. I mean, how do you address this with your group?
Look, I think the talent development organization, every company, they do a really good job. And they really pivoted from grooming leaders who are now hybrid or remote versus who are on site. But when you look at just the way in my vantage point, all this structure is very different in different countries. The UAE recently went to 5-day work week, 4.5-day work week. So they actually let folks home early to take care of the kids or the parents. India is calling folks back in the office. The government is actually forcing companies to return back to the office. And even current populations, a lot of our women employees, they are home, but when they are home, they're expected to do certain things. And so they'd rather be in the office. So we are seeing that change. US also, we don't hire now a lot of entry level, a lot that's done globally. So how do you grow that middle manager, right, in a flat structure where most of his team could be remote, could be in a high value center like India or Indonesia. So that's a challenge. Also, recently we are having a new building in India, and we are advertising the building itself because it has amphitheater at the bottom. It has 3 stories of mall type environment, shops and restaurants, and the workers there, they want to in the evening meet their families right where they work and really have some quality family time. So that's very different dynamics you see geographically we're changing. And that's becoming a hook for us to hire and retain talent.
People value other things
That's right.
more than just a few things. But I also think this whole thing leads to, will we need to rethink job architectures? Because
Absolutely.
if you look at the Gen Ys and you think about the promotions that they want every year, like there's not enough levels left.
Yeah, I was just talking. Yes, we were just talking about that. Yeah. No, absolutely. And then it's interesting because you can have good things that conflict in your job architecture choices, right? So for instance, if you have more steps in your job architecture, it gives people those promotions, right? It's like the feeling of
vertical. I think it can be lateral is what you said.
it can be, and I think that's because the research on flatter jobs architectures is that it's actually good for DEI purposes, because if there's any bias in your system, fewer gates in your system means less bias at the top. So you end up with more diversity at the top if people aren't going through like 20 job levels, right? But helping people understand and giving them, I think, concrete markers of lateral progress too. That's where we've seen organizations have a lot of success with kind of these badging programs and things, because what's good about a promotion is that it's something concrete. So it's not just like, oh, pat on the back, you learned all the stuff. It's like, look, we did a thing for you. But we have to create the equivalence of that, to your point, for the lateral development. Is it, is it badging? Is it skills tagging? What is it? It's got to be concrete, just like promotions are concrete. But you're pointing to a great issue, which is that basically changing employee needs and preferences are challenging some of the fundamentals of how we build companies, right? I think it's a very live issue. Yes.
I have an observation that I think lots of the folks who want the promotion every 6 months, lots of them get married and have children and buy a house, and I think that changes their perspective on this rapid career advancement, and they hit periods in their career where they're wanting to do their share, but not like go crazy with promotion. I do think we'll grow through that sort of concern about everybody gets a trophy in the workplace every year.
Yeah, I mean, they get less concerned about promotions, they get more concerned about pay at critical moments, right? People's needs shift through life stages. I do think social media has had kind of a negative impact, right? That people on LinkedIn with exploding fireworks, right? I just got promoted, we've all seen that graphic. I do think social media is amplifying it a little bit for some of the younger workers, but in general, I do subscribe to the theory that life stages have more in common than generations do, if that makes sense.
Talk about social media. I see LinkedIn and see my own employees. I'm like, is that your title really? So a lot of times,
Yes.
but
Yeah. Yes.
But the reality is, you can only enforce the titles in a company. LinkedIn is a social media. It's there.
You ever find somebody with your title on LinkedIn? That's happened to me before. Not in my current company.
So Melissa, you talk to a lot of leaders as a part of your book and others. What are some of the things you modeled off with some of the leaders you talk to?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think for me, it comes back to some of those pieces about creating space, asking questions. When I think about what I do differently, probably from the leaders that I sort of grew up admiring, right? I model that stuff, but I feel back to the question about domain knowledge, which I think is a really piquant one. I am much more comfortable saying I don't know than the leaders that I have historically kind of grown up reporting to. I think that's where I'm seeing kind of some innovation and progress in leader behavior. And there's two kinds of I don't know, by the way. There's one kind of I don't know that is genuinely, I have no clue, right? I really don't know. And then there's an I don't know that opens the door for your people's knowledge, right? I'm not going to take up all the oxygen in the room. I'm going to say I don't know so I can find out what you know. And for me, that's one of the more encouraging kind of developments in leader behavior. And we're about to get to a whole discussion on hybrid and in person and all that. And I think particularly that moment of I'm going to shut up and hear from you in hybrid space is really important, because it is very easy to get on a Zoom call, a Teams call, and just bulldoze right over people. So that's a bit of, are there things that you think that you might do differently or that you think about differently from kind of the leaders you grew up watching?
Look, I think, so one thing I always struggle, Melissa, is how do I build a culture when half of my organization is hybrid or work from home?
Yeah, the leaders you grew up watching didn't have that challenge, right?
How do you really bring in the new talent and groom them? And this problem is real. So we are headquartered in Houston, and a lot of my employees come in 1 day a week, some of them 2 days a week, some of them every other week. We have locations in Middle East and Europe and India where they come in probably more than 2-3 days a week. So it's very diverse. And a lot of my leadership is really now retraining them or just kind of pivoting. How do you really build that culture, and how do you really let them know what that culture looks like? So for me, it's really establishing different metrics, how you measure, and how you reward them. And really by, one of my hypotheses is by rewarding them to the right things and by really kind of modeling them off some of the leaders, they get integrated into the culture.
Yeah, I like that. Really watching to see when they do the right things. Yes. I think that's so critical. Any good leadership advice from the group? Anyone have any tips and tricks they're using?
I was just going to say, in hybrid environments, one technique that I've seen work really well is a leader who has some signature phrases that are kind of a signal to the group of, this is what our culture is about. And I've worked for a couple of people who have used these signature phrases of success to the point where other people in the organization are using them in their meetings, and people are repeating it to remind themselves, this is more here, this is what's cool, this is what's not cool. So me personally, I'm always interested to learn from other leaders' vocabulary and signature phrases. I had one leader who had a famous phrase, which was, all meetings are optional. Now that doesn't sound like much, but what that was three tasks to tell everyone, no matter what your work style is, I want you to take your focus time, get your focus time. And everyone repeated it. So
I love
I'm
that.
always interested. Anybody else have any other vocab examples?
I love that. Example, and I think it's that we can't just build a digital twin of our culture. We have to actively build this new culture. So who's defining the words that define our culture? So I think in the same way that cultures evolve, because we started doing tequila shots on Cinco de Mayo. Oh, everybody didn't do that? But when your in-person culture evolves, and then you start putting some values against it, we have to do that all over.
Over again.
So in one meeting, we do meetings are optional. In another meeting, somebody says, you must come to all of my meetings, which is the culture. So I think, and I'm going to say one more thing, sorry, because we're listening to me this night. This was from Fletcher President, the CIO of Cisco. Here's what he said, that you think of relationships as a bank. When you are in person, you're making deposits. How was your weekend? Did you see that movie? We're making deposits. Who started the meeting? Who got this agenda? Read off the metrics. So being conscious that you must make deposits in whatever way, and rewards could be
Yeah.
a way to do it.
Love it. All right. Now, since Lori already has a copy, you get a copy of my book. Here. For answering the question. Here, come up. Speak the words, right? There you go. Oh, amazing. All right. So
I was going to say, you have a very interesting concept in your book around work intensity. Can you talk a little bit about that? Because I think that kind of dives into some of the things Laurie talked
So
about.
work intensity is an obsession of mine. It's a concept that is actually talked about a lot in the academic literature, and we don't talk about it a ton in professional practice. So what work intensity is it's basically having to do too many units of work per unit of time. So it might be, I'm on too many Teams or Zoom calls in a day. It might be, if anyone's ever seen, there's an iconic United Farm Workers video of how quickly someone has to pick strawberries, right? It might be having to pick too many strawberries in an hour. Every job has its version of work intensification, right? Where you're just doing too many things in too little time. And it's interesting because it's not necessarily a straight line to outcomes. It is not a straight line to productivity. It doesn't mean you're getting more done. It just means you're doing more in less time and you're burning out faster, right? So how does this never happens in tech? Right?
No, look, Martha kind of mentioned, right? In IT, this is probably happens more often than others because you have so many competing priorities. We talked about them having to know the function, the domain expertise, that you know the technology. And by the way, now everybody's talking about AI. So I better learn AI on top of my day job and also having a family. So the work intensity is real. And whether you're working remotely or even hybrid, it just piles on. And the amount of capacity you can now devote, this world of multitasking is also kind of causes a problem.
Yeah, absolutely. We've all seen those pictures of like when you do too many back-to-back meetings, how red your brain turns, and the research on how we all think we're good at multitasking, but actually we're not so good, right? There's this problem of overload in modern work. And I think actually one of the most interesting impacts of Gen AI could simply be to just de-intensify work, right? Just make work less crummy. Just pull some tasks out of that overcrowded hour, but we'll see. So another, yeah, you're
I was going to ask you, greedy work.
greedy work.
So how is that different from work?
Yeah.
Intensity and-
So greedy work is a fascinating concept that actually the woman who came up with the term, Claudia Golden, just won the Nobel Prize. So greedy work is worth paying attention to. And what greedy work is when work spills out of the boundaries of the working day, right? You're working at breakfast, you're working at dinner, you're working on the weekends, you're working on vacations. And what Golden's research established was that we used to pay people less for working too much, right? Overwork was a problem of bricklayers who needed to work 2 jobs to make ends meet. Now, overwork is a problem of CEOs. We pay you, and this is what her economic research established, we pay you more to work too much. And that's why work has taken over our lives. And speaking as a caregiver myself, right, a generation above and a generation below, right, it almost comes to the point of threatening to exclude you from the workforce, right? You have moments of feeling like, if work's going to take all this time, where do I get the time for the other stuff? And I think, again, it has a meaningful impact on employee burnout and is worth thinking about. And it's little things that you can do, like, do I schedule meetings at 5:30 p.m.? Maybe I don't. Maybe I say, go have dinner, right? Maybe we don't have meetings in the evening at all. And that time is for asynchronous work if you want to do it, right? Your choice. You can work whatever time. I mean, is this something you see manifesting as well?
Oh, greedy work is alive and well in tech industry. I mean, it's a global environment. It's Monday morning somewhere.
That's the other issue. Yeah, the global piece. Yeah.
So, if you think about mobile devices, kind of bridge the boundary of work and life. Now with work anywhere, that's even further kind of expanded your day. For me, I have employees in Qatar who come and work on Sundays. And really my phone starts calling me, so you constantly, somebody's working somewhere. And in the global environment, when we work with our coworkers, could be anywhere. Yeah, it's 5 o'clock for you, but they're starting the day. So really you have to kind of come up and allow your employees a room. You cannot really have core hours because just don't exist in a global environment. You just kind of have to trust your employees, let them take the time when they need. And really they have to, and you have to also be flexible to understand, okay, that's what I'm signed up for in this technology world.
And prioritize asynchronous work, right? Where you and I don't have to be working at the same time if we're in dramatically different time zones. Yes, a question.
Well, I just heard other people talking into it. I couldn't hear that.
Oh, there's another one behind you. Try that one. Yeah.
Okay. So you're asking for strategies and that tension with hybrid work.
Yeah.
Like work is always happening. I know some things that in my background, we really organize our teams by stripes. So rather than, if you think of the globe as stripes of time zones, and we organize teams the European team. And then I heard recently that Atlassian is actually kind of, the software company has actually coined this as an organizational structure now of having striped teams. So again, take 3 time zones and to say to work on this work, you're going to live in this stripe. And so that's the scope of this work. I think it's a pretty, it's introducing geography, but yet flexibility north and south.
I like that.
And I just think it's a really provocative idea. I'd just be curious what your reaction is to that.
I have a positive reaction to that because I'm picturing the stripes and you've got a variation of labor costs within each stripe, right? Because that's always the excuse. So take labor cost out of the equation by you've got a variety of options. And I think it's a very favorable strategy.
Positive reaction, and does he get a book?
He does get a book, yes. Absolutely. Come up and get a book. Ask a question, get the last book.
So,
you said something really fascinating about training resilience and how the leader keeps the rain off, let 20% of the rain fall. I was just wondering if that's a great idea, but I wonder if you could make it a little more tangible with some anecdotes or specific examples. Either one of you.
Yeah, I mean, I always try to give, when somebody comes to me with a problem, I always try to give them one full round of trying to solve the problem, right? Like end to end, not like I'll let you make an attempt and then I'll jump in for you, but like end to end, you work through the second and third order consequences of your actions, right? But that takes, and I don't always do it perfectly, right? That takes, for anybody, like again, like think of parenting, right? To let your kid walk a few steps and look like they're gonna fall right over, it's that muscle. And we don't always do it perfectly. But for me, it's that one full cycle of, and you have to sit there and watch, like somebody reacts poorly to their email or gets mad at them on the call, and like that sit back motion. It's hard, but that's what I try to do.
So just to follow up on that, Melissa, right? How do you see the ways of working change in 2024? And what is your advice to leaders? What are some of the things they should emphasize?
I think number one, get creative, like the stripes thing, right? Like let's inject a little creativity into how we think about some of these very fixed tropes. I think number two, I am seeing a greater emphasis on asynchronous work, and I think that's a real positive. In the last chapter of the book, I actually talk about asynchronous work can be a powerful tool when it's managed properly. You still need to solve for human interaction, particularly for extroverts, right, who can get really depressed doing asynchronous work. There's certain populations, like salespeople, right, will get super sad working asynchronously. And it's not necessarily good for a sales role, right? It's not perfect. So I think, kind of a greater trend toward asynchronous work, a greater trend toward creative solutions, but also I am seeing some nice emphasis on what I would call the basics of leadership that we've gotten kind of crummy at maybe over the last 10 years. Things like basic communication skills, giving people templates for empathy. Here's how to actually shut up and listen to somebody. It's a learnable skill. Not everybody's born that way. So I think kind of put those things together, a little creativity, a little old-fashioned leadership behavior, and not making everybody work at exactly the same moment. You might have a formula for success there.
Thank you.
All right. How are we doing we got a question in the back. How are we doing for time?
Well, I think we're about at time.
We are at time.
1 minute.
I'll make it quick. What are some of your strategies for demonstrating, this is going back to your earlier comments, demonstrating value to that team that's going to be learning? Because leadership wants things done, right? You have that pressure, that downward pressure. You have to create this bubble that protects your staff. What are your strategies for doing that?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I think it's stepping back and doing a little bit of the what's in it for me for the team. If they just get kind of, to your point, that downward instruction of this is what has to get done, it's not going to land well. So actually taking a step back and being the interpreter between senior management, that's how a lot of times I think of my role as an interpreter's role of, okay, we're going to do this, but guess what? Here's what you're going to learn. Here's how you're going to grow. Here's how this feeds your career. And also, being a conscious career advocate, I think that's good leadership muscle, particularly for frontline leaders to build, is to say, okay, you do this well, I will make sure you are visible for your efforts, and consciously calling that out. That can be worth a lot. I don't know if you have good strategies in this regard.
To that, look, I think now with remote work, hybrid work, it's really important that you let your employees know that they are seen, they're relevant, and they are heard. Because a lot of times they could be working a lot of hours, and they need to know you know that. Right? So I personally make a point to touch every employee in my organization. There's about 400 of them, where I have roundtables, and I touch every one of them once a year. I travel most major locations, and I spend majority of my time just meeting them and just really hearing what's on their mind. And I make time to just really celebrate the successes and again showcase what they've done. It's just so important for employees to kind of have and know that the leaders, they care and they know that they're relevant.
Yeah.
I want to make a comment on that, because I think if we went back like what Charles Green said about the trust equation, I think everything we said, I feel like kind of summarizes into it, especially if you have the interpreter layer, right? You need to build that trust, which is in that equation a combination of credibility, I think it was credibility, reliability, and intimacy, which you're talking about.
Intimacy,
building
yeah.
intimacy. And people have to feel like you're coming from a place of growing other people, but not self-interest. Because in this world of that interpreter, like it could be seen as, are you taking my work and then are you presenting it? Right?
Absolutely, absolutely. That's great. Trust is key. All right, well, what a good note to end on, guys. Thank you so much for a lively conversation, and thank you for Vagesh for being like a live example of doing the good leadership stuff. So amazing. Thank you guys so much.